Every internet atheist I've encountered have more or less jettisoned trying to understand, except for PineCreek.
Hey, man! This makes sense!
Okay, first is, I gotta double check. I think I see Wyatt Verche. Don't you, Wyatt, don't you make those expensive purses? Verche? Anyhow, 1,000 pine points to you, but I don't think you need it because if I'm right, you make expensive women's purses. I guess men can buy those purses too. 1,000 pine points to you anyhow. Dust. Oh, that's an interesting name. Hi, you get 500 pine points. And Captain Kerf. Hey, Captain, I like your hat. Oh, man, third. But third is worth something. That's a little something something. It's 250 pine points to you. Now, objective morality. This is a boring topic. I'm going to ask a question to everyone, not just theists listening, but why does objective morality matter? Can someone answer that question for me? Why does the whole idea of objective morality matter? I think I know the answer from at least the theist point of view. And you know what the answer I think is? I think objective morality matters because how else are you going to say, stop that, unless you got a God behind you enforcing it or something like that? Like my father is going to beat you up. You better do what my father says. It's just not my opinion, don't you know? This is the big guys. So besides that, just having that oomph, what good is objective morality? I mean, we humans are, if we have these moral intuitions anyhow, most of us are going to use those moral intuitions. In fact, here's a funny thought. Isn't just the existence of David Wood evidence against objective morality based on intuitions? He's a psychopath, he says. I would expect that under naturalism, but I wouldn't expect that under theism. Oh, that's right, but there's sin. Sin entered the world somehow, some way, through some fruit to some original human, to humans, which caused everything to be messed up, which caused God to regret that he made humans in the first place, which caused God to flood them all, maybe, which caused God to start again, knowing that things are going to get messed up again afterwards. So what's the answer? Why does objective morality matter? Let's see, let me check the live stream chat. It matters for money? Justifying self-righteousness? Yeah, that's that factor. It's a very technical term, factor. It's important for order. But can't you have order without this idea of the objective morality? I mean, I should back up. What is objective morality? I'm going to define it. When I ask that question, why does objective morality matter? I'm defining it the way a guy like David Wood would define it. Something outside of humans. A moral law, a code, a system of right and wrongs whose foundation at its core lies outside of mankind. Why does that matter? And if your answer is, I'm not alone, it says it's important for order, law and order. No, you can have law and order without that type of morality, objective morality. Like, can't you imagine that no God exists and still everything be the way it is? What are some other reasons? Jerome Robinson seems to agree with me. It literally doesn't matter, but it's for authoritative arguments on their end. Yeah, that's what I was saying. Morality becomes objective, but it isn't inherently objective. Becomes objective. My God can beat up your God. We need to know what is right and wrong. Well, but you can get this knowledge without a God existing, yes? Why does objective morality matter? I'm trying to find a Christian answer. Maybe I already read a Christian answer. Abdul says it doesn't matter. See, my theory is the ontology of it doesn't matter. But if objective morality exists, what's really important is the epistemology. How do you know what it is? Because even if it does exist, what good is it if you don't know what it is, right? That makes sense. That's reasonable. Okay, so I pinned a poll and on the top. So all you have to do is, I don't care if you're a Christian, a Muslim, an atheist. I don't care who you are, what you are. You can be a robot and you can still vote. I want you to click on it. I have nothing to gain or lose from this, but I prefer you only click once and vote once. This is not like, what's the sign? It's not like where you can vote many times like on those TV shows. And I'm just curious, what percentage of my viewers think that it exists? I'm going to place my vote and then see what it... Oh, wow. I'll show the results. I guess everybody can see the results for themselves, but we just started. So I'll keep tabs on this as we go and see what the results are. But I guess David Wood and Apostate Prophet are having an online debate, which is a great idea. So basically, they make videos back and forth, and people watch the debate unfold over several weeks. It's a great idea for them in the sense that they can get lots of views from this. And Apostate Prophet, if you see this, click off now. I don't want to bias you with anything I'm about to say. And my guess is David Wood's not going to say anything new that we haven't heard 1,000 times before. But he is good at saying things in a different way. The content probably won't be different, but maybe the delivery will. There's no link? Oh, yeah, you're right. It is a wrong link. Let me get rid of that. And let's copy that link and make sure it works. Still didn't work. Oh, here it is. This should be the right link. Paste, enter, pin. Okay, try that one, see if that works. Yeah, Myron is just making mistakes, mistake after mistake. I really do want to fire him, but then he'll sue me again. Okay, here we go. Here's David Wood on his views on his opening argument.
I should point out here at the beginning, the two great blunders AP has already made. One very common blunder and one very uncommon blunder. The common blunder can be seen around the world. It's a form of throwing the baby out with the bathwater. As millions...
Apostate Prophet's here. Hey, you can come in later if you want.
...of Muslims...
Oh, no, that... You don't want to say your response to her.
Muslims are abandoning Islam. Many of them end up abandoning far more than Islam. Instead of simply rejecting Muhammad as a prophet and the Quran as the word of Allah, they decide to reject religion in general, the existence of God, and anything associated with a supernatural realm.
Did you guys hear that? He's saying that a lot of Muslims that leave Islam, they leave theism altogether. I said this in a video a while back, and I mean it. Supporters of David Wood, Patreon supporters, people give him money. You do know you're supporting atheism, right? I dare say that the majority of people who leave Islam because of David Wood join my team. Not his. Oh, I shouldn't say it like that, but it's kind of fun to say it like that. But they just don't, they become atheists or agnostics, or they just don't care. Am I wrong? Do you think I'm wrong about that, David Wood? Or people who support David Wood? Do you think, no. People who go to David Wood's channel who are Muslims and they eventually leave, no, they go straight to Christianity. No, they leave religion. And the reason for this is because they see that the same things David Wood says against Islam, a lot of that stuff can be said against Christianity. A lot of the same reasoning and the same even specific ideas. It's basically believing the creator of the universe is into publishing books. and saying wild and wacky things and not seemingly know what's really moral or not. And that brings us back to this topic.
The problem here, apart from being overly hasty and wrong, is that some beliefs that ex-Muslims want to keep actually depend on things that they're throwing out. Much of this debate will focus on one particular example. So that's the common blunder. The uncommon blunder is that AP has entered into a structured, careful, in-depth debate stretched out over several weeks. As a rule, if you want to go on thinking that our beliefs about morality can be rationally justified without God, you have to keep your thinking pretty superficial. You have to rely on rhetorical tricks and misrepresentations of your opponent's positions. You don't want to take the time to ponder the issues rigorously and...
The mistake Apostle Prophet's making is he made the mistake of making this over several weeks where you actually have to think and ponder. And if this debate's about thinking and pondering, Apostate Prophet's just lost, because nobody can think more than I can think, and nobody can ponder more than I can ponder, because I have a PhD. It's flag-waving phony PhDs.
Meticulously. It seems then that AP's atheism was doomed to destruction the moment we agreed on a format. But don't take my word for this. Let's start the debate and see what happens.
You gotta love the audacity and the arrogance, the conceit of that opening statement, right? Pasta Prophet, you must have laughed like I'm laughing.
When we talk about morality, we're talking about things like moral obligation. Human beings have moral obligations to do certain things and not to do other things. Moral value, some things are intrinsically good. Moral responsibility, certain actions make us worthy of praise or blame. Moral improvement, people become better or worse, and so on. Here...
Oh, that's an interesting one. Moral improvement, people become better or worse. Or if it's improvement, it becomes better. That's an interesting one. Do you think, I wonder if David believes that societies over thousands of years have moral improvement. I want you to keep that in mind when he talks about intuitions.
In my opening statement, I'm going to focus on...
Because he's almost making it sound like morality can evolve.
Moral obligation. Many of AP's criticisms of Muhammad have to do with Muhammad violating basic moral obligations and commanding or allowing his followers to violate basic moral obligations.
Yeah. Some of the things Muhammad did violates basic moral obligations. That would never apply to Yahweh, would it? No.
But what are we doing when we say that someone who lived 14 centuries ago in a completely different part of the world should have followed certain moral rules that we somehow have access to? What sense does it make to impose moral obligations across space and time?
Good question.
It seems that moral obligations have some peculiar features. Let's consider 4 of these peculiar features.
Yeah, that's a very good question. Over thousands of years, is it really reasonable to think that moral obligation stays the same? That's a good question for Christians and Muslims listening. Like, is it always wrong, no matter the context, no matter the culture, no matter the whatever? Is it always wrong to stone the practicing homosexual? Is it wrong today to stone a practicing homosexual? Was it ever right to stone? Throughout all history, was it ever right to stone the practicing homosexual? I wonder.
First, moral obligations are...
Oh, and I fell into David Wood's trap. See, now I'm using rhetorical tricks and not really thinking and pondering like a PhD would.
Are most naturally expressed and understood as authoritative commands. They're imperatives. Do this, don't do that. This raises an obvious question. Who's issuing these commands? The answer to that question is extremely important, because if the commands don't...
Well, in this context, who's issuing those commands of what's right and wrong? In this context, it's me and Myron, I guess. And Satan, I guess, because he's the head boss.
don't come from someone or something with
Because it's my YouTube channel.
the proper authority over us, we have no obligation to obey them. Second,
Whoa. Moral authority above us, we have no obligation to obey them. You need a moral authority above you in order to have an obligation. No, I don't see how that follows, actually. Let's say someone has moral authority over me, like God. Why ought I obey him or do what he says about morals, morality? Why? Christians, can you answer that question for me quickly? What's the first thing that pops in your head? Why ought I obey God? I don't think you can get an ought from that God is the moral authority, therefore you ought to obey him. You cannot get that ought from an is. I really don't think so. Now you can say, well, Doug, he knows what's best for you, so therefore you should do what he says. But what if I don't want what's best for me? Like, eating cheesecake is not what's best for me, but I love eating cheesecake. Well, Doug, you ought to obey God because he created you. So, I created my kids, and they don't have to obey me if they don't want. Oh, but Doug, there's consequences, right? You discipline your kids. Yeah, I do. Oh, so you're saying God will discipline me? Oh, yeah. And maybe not in this life, but he'll definitely get you in the life after. So just you wait. Every knee will bow.
moral obligations are objective, meaning that we can be right or wrong about them. If an old man thinks that it's perfectly acceptable to have sex with a prepubescent 9-year-old girl, the fact that he thinks it's perfectly acceptable doesn't make it perfectly acceptable. He's simply wrong. The wrongness of the act is a moral fact, and as the saying goes, facts don't care about our feelings. Now, how can there be facts about morality that are independent of what we think or believe? Moral obligations aren't the sort of things we find out there in the world. We don't find them with a microscope or a telescope.
Yeah, he's referring to that we're just a bunch of, if there is no God, we're just a bunch of atoms. But instead of maybe viewing it as moral obligations, maybe we should just view it as goals. Do we share the same values and goals? If your goal is X and you do something that gets you towards X, then that's something you ought to do if you want to get to X. I think a lot of morality has evolved over thousands of years to get us to X, and X being a society where there's lower suffering and more well-being. So, for example, let's take the one that most Christians go for, maybe even Muslims, and that's the Holocaust, the Nazis of World War II. And let's say you're a Christian and you go up to a Nazi and you start talking to the Nazi and saying, this is morally, objectively wrong to kill Jews. And the Nazi looks at you and says, so? Who says? Well, God says. So? Who cares what God has to think? What you're going to be left with doing is trying to convince the Nazi why he ought not kill Jews. And then you're going to start talking about things like, well, put yourself in the Jews' shoes. Would you want to go through this? No, of course not. Well, then why are you doing it to them? Well, because they're going to hurt me if I don't. Well, how are they going to hurt you? Have they hurt you in the past? Well, yeah, they killed Jesus. Well, so what if they killed Jesus? They're not killing you. Well, don't you believe in justice? We got to get back at them. And basically the point is, whether objective morality exists or not, when people are trying to figure out what is right or wrong, it's going to be an argument trying to convince, one side's going to try to convince the other side, this is the actions we should take. And the other side's going to say, well, no, I disagree. Here's what I think the actions we should take. And over time, we find out which side of the argument wins. Now here's the big if they share the same common goal. And different societies sometimes have different goals. And that's what you probably would expect if there is no God. If you would expect that God placed this objective moral code on our hearts or through revelation, you would think societies and cultures all around the world would share that same objective morality, unless maybe this God doesn't care about objective morality or letting people know, that which could be the case.
They're in our minds, and yet somehow
Jews. Yeah, that's a hard, say that 10 times fast.
Independent of our minds. So what's the basis of their objectivity and independence?
What's the basis? I bet you anything David Wood leans Calvinistic. I don't think he would call himself a Calvinist. But whenever I hear a Christian say, what is the foundation? What is the basis for this? I think of Calvinism. They love the tag arguments. And my response to it is, what does it matter what the foundation is? The more important thing is the epistemology, even if that foundation exists.
Third, moral obligations are overriding, meaning that they trump other kinds of obligations. If the government makes a law ordering you to hand over Jews or Muslims so that they can be sent to concentration camps, your moral obligation not to treat your fellow human beings that way overrides your legal obligation to aid in their abuse or extermination.
Unless God, Yahweh himself commands it, right, David Wood? Hand over the Jews. No, that goes against my moral intuitions. Hand over those Muslims. We're going to kill them. No, that goes against my moral intuitions. But Yahweh said we need to kill these people. Oh, Yahweh said it. Okay, then we'll do it. Right, David Wood? Don't you believe that? Don't you believe the Old Testament, David Wood? Don't you believe that when it says, thus saith the Lord to Moses or to Joshua, go wipe out these people, kill the women, kill the younglings, kill the infants, kill the beasts, except the virgin girls, keep them alive, Numbers 31. So, does God trump your moral intuitions? Of course he does. And God has said these things in the past. What's to stop him from saying those things in the future? God is a just God. Sometimes people need to be killed. And God's the man for it. Well, no, humans are the people for it. And God just tells them what to do. Because God doesn't like to get his hands dirty. Except for Ananias and Sapphira. That he just loved to snuff them out.
We have all sorts of obligations in our lives. Why would one particular kind of obligation, moral obligation, override all others? Fourth, moral obligations are universal. We apply them to everyone with a properly functioning mind. Command
present company excluded. A properly functioning mind, which David Wood has admitted he doesn't have.
We apply them to everyone with a properly functioning mind. Commands like don't torture old ladies for fun apply to all sane human beings. If we hear that someone has been torturing old ladies for fun, we would condemn his behavior regardless of where he comes from, which religion he follows, or what his political views happen to be.
Yeah, and this is a great argument for objective morality. I admit that. I think most societies, if not all, would say you shouldn't torture old ladies or babies for fun. But remember, keep in mind, it's the for fun part which makes it wrong, because it's basically saying for no reason or for your own personal entertainment. Now, if it was don't torture old ladies to save the planet, then we might do a double take. This is a moral dilemma. Okay, we've got to torture one person in order to save 7 billion people. Maybe we should torture this old lady. See, it's the reasons that make something right or wrong, not necessarily the action. And, Christians will hear this and they will push back on it, and Muslims too. But it's true. You guys admit this. Action X, like let's say killing a baby, is not wrong or right. It depends from your worldview or from David Wood's worldview what Yahweh has to say about it. Did he command it? Does he will it? Does he want this baby to die? If the answer is yes. If he wants a human to stick a sword through a baby's heart, then it's morally right. Except for Christians like Randall Rouser. He would say, no, my God would never do that. No, I know it says that in the Old Testament. That's what it says, but that's not what it means.
Why are we convinced that the commands in our heads are somehow commands to all human beings? So, moral obligations have some interesting features, and a good theory of morality should clarify and explain why moral obligations have these interesting features.
Yeah, evolution, I think, can explain that. We have evolved. You see this in the animal kingdom, where certain animals in a certain tribe will push out the rebellious member of the tribe and or kill them if they're not following the rules of the tribe. Now, unless you want to say these moral obligations, these moral intuitions from God also apply to chimpanzees, go ahead. I feel free, I guess. Because guys like Inspiring Philosophy believe that, I guess, these animals go to heaven anyhow, so maybe it does apply to them.
The problem for our atheist friends is that atheistic theories of morality don't clarify and explain why moral obligations have these features. Instead, atheistic theories of morality undermine our moral obligations and suggest that we're delusional about our moral obligations.
I know what he's saying here. I don't think atheists would use the word delusional. I think they would say that we have these intuitions about objective morals, but when we say it, it's maybe illusionary, an illusion. Maybe there is no objective morality, but we feel there is, and that we evolved with these feelings, these intuitions, to help us survive. But I know for Christians like David Wood, well, no, let me back up. For many Christians, that just sounds so cold and heartless. But for David Wood, I don't think it does sound cold and heartless. I think he understands that. But talking about these moral intuitions, this is one of my favorite clips. This is William Lane Craig versus Arif Ahmed, which is a Muslim-sounding name. So if Muslims are listening, they can appreciate this guy. This is what he has to say about these moral intuitions and Dr. Craig's moral argument.
Dr. Craig tells us that we need God if there are to be objective moral values. Now, there's two things I want to say about that very briefly. The first thing is that if there are any objective moral values, I know that murdering innocent people is wrong. I know that laying siege to a town and slaughtering all its inhabitants is wrong. That's why I think Srebrenica was wrong. If moral objective values come from the God that Dr. Craig believes in, then that's right. Just look in the book of Joshua. What does he say? Kill everybody except the whore who lives in that town and protected by messengers. So it looks like, if we do think objective moral values come from God, it looks like we should say Srebrenica was all right. In any case, what reason is there for thinking there are objective moral values? There must be a good argument for this. After all, there are no objective aesthetic values, quite plausibly, so Dr. Craig must give us an argument for saying there are objective moral ones. What is the argument? Well, it was striking, so I wrote it down. He said, there are objective moral values because deep down we know there are. That's it. That's the argument. Now, that may pass for an argument in Talbot Theological College. It may indeed pass for an argument in the White House. But, but this is Cambridge, and it doesn't pass for an argument here.
Yeah, it doesn't pass for an argument here either. So is this what David Wood's saying? That we have these intuitions, that we just know objective morality exists, and if you say it doesn't, you're either inconsistent in your life or you're suppressing maybe the truth and unrighteousness because you act like there's objective moral values. So deep down, you know they exist. But is that really a good argument? Deep down, you know they exist?
That's why some of you atheists, as I was drawing attention to some very basic features of moral obligations, were thinking to yourselves, No, moral obligations aren't objective. No, they're not universal. Your metaphysics has mutilated your concept of moral obligation until someone does something to you, in which case you'll suddenly snap back to believing in objective, overriding, universal moral obligations. Fortunately, theistic theories of morality don't suggest that we're delusional about our moral obligations. Take what's called divine command theory. Divine command theory claims that our moral obligations are commands of God. Now, atheists tend to misunderstand this theory in two ways. One, they think that divine command theorists are asserting that you can only know what your moral obligations are if God gives you some special revelation like the Bible or the Quran. I've heard Muslim apologists make claims along these lines. It seems to be fairly common in Islam to think that apart from God telling you something through some special revelation, you just don't know what to do. But outside of Islam, I've never heard a divine command theorist say that we can only know what our moral obligations are through something like the Bible or the Quran.
Yeah, but I think David would admit that you can get these moral obligations from the Quran, well, not the Quran, but the Bible. What's the other way? Well, then it's the moral intuitions. What the moral code that God has put on your heart.
There can be specific commands given in Scripture, but as far as general moral obligations are concerned, all rational human beings have some kind of access to them.
Are you rational, David Wood? Did you have access to them when you were 18 years old?
Divine command theory is a philosophical claim about what moral obligations really are, what their nature is, what their status is, not about how we become aware of them. As far as how
so he's talking about the ontology, not the epistemology. And as I said earlier, what does the ontology matter if you can't know what it is?
we become aware of our moral obligations, God can communicate through special revelations such as the books of the Bible, but this wouldn't be the only way that we learn about our moral obligations. God creates us with a capacity for understanding moral truths, just as he creates us with a capacity for understanding mathematical and logical truths.
Yeah, and each person has a different level of understanding, right? And maybe even when it comes to morality, he picked math for a reason, because that's probably the best example of what we would call knowledge that spans across a diversity of cultures, that we can all come to agreement. But morality is not as simple as math.
God can communicate his commands through the human conscience. The Bible talks about Gentiles who haven't received any special revelation obeying God's commands by nature because God's commands have been written on their hearts. The main way we learn about our moral obligations is by being taught. Think about a parallel with something like mathematics. People had to figure out mathematical truths down through history. But once they figured out mathematical truths, these mathematical truths were then passed down through teaching, education. Your parents taught you numbers and basic operations. You learned more difficult concepts in school.
This almost sounds like he's saying that morality can evolve, because as we gain more knowledge about the way the world is, we can gain more moral knowledge. Yes? Just like your parents teach you things. The parents in the Old Testament 3,000, 4,000 years ago, or 2,000 years ago even, they would teach their kids less about morality, or let's back it up, less about physics than what parents today could teach their kids about physics. Yes? I think all Christians would agree with that, because we know more about physics today. I submit that the same holds true for morality. This is why Jesus didn't just come out and say, or Yahweh in the Old Testament just didn't come out and say, don't have slaves, don't own people as property for the rest of your life. Don't pass them on to your kids as an inheritance. We have learned over thousands of years that you produce better societies if you don't have slaves. And there's still slavery today. So we haven't quite learned enough.
Likewise, your parents taught you basic moral obligations. You learned more from society and so on. So, We arrive at our knowledge of moral obligations through a combination of factors. We have a capacity for learning moral truths. Most human beings have a conscience. Other people teach us our moral obligations, and we read about them in Scripture.
By the way, none of the things he said just now about how we learn about moral obligations necessarily has to involve a God. Even Scripture. You can imagine, if you're a theist listening, you can imagine, I hope you can imagine this. If you can't, then maybe your capacity is limited. But if you can imagine no God existing and people writing down books and then calling it Scripture later and saying a deity did say these things, everything David Wood just said could not involve a God.
Another common atheist misunderstanding here is thinking that divine command theorists are asserting that you can only be moral if you believe in God. Here again, that's not what divine command theory claims. Think about mathematics again.
I agree with David Wood. Although I don't think very many, there's still a lot of stupid Christians who'll say that you can't be moral without God. But I think the smarter Christians and Muslims would say, of course, you can be moral without God, which brings me back to my main point. The moral ontology, the foundation for morality, if objective morality exists, is irrelevant. Because it doesn't seem like we need it. If you can be moral without the belief in this ontology, then why do we need it? I think it's just for people like David would say, that is wrong because my God said so, and it's not a matter of opinion, and it makes me feel good to say it's not a matter of opinion, so this is why I believe what I believe.
Here's a question. What is a number? You might think that it's just a concept in your head, but numbers seem to have some sort of reality apart from our use of them. The laws of nature have numerical constants in them. Numbers are everywhere in nature, whether we're aware of them or not. So what are they? Suppose, hypothetically, just as an illustration, that the true reality of numbers, their ultimate reality, is that they are eternal ideas in the mind of God. I'm not claiming that. Again, this is just to illustrate. Suppose that numbers are...
This is the, I'm not saying this, but I'm saying this tactic.
Eternal ideas in the mind of God. We could call this divine number theory. When God creates the universe, he uses numbers, which is why numbers are everywhere. And God creates us in his image with a capacity for doing mathematics, which allows us to use mathematics and to discover the numbers in nature. Notice, if divine number theory were true, you could still use numbers. You could still do math. You could still uncover the laws of nature, even if you didn't know that numbers are actually eternal ideas in the mind of God. You could still do math, even if you didn't believe in God, because you've been created with the ability to do math regardless of what you believe about God.
So what can't you do then?
Similarly, if divine command theory is correct, your moral obligations are, ultimately, commands of God. But you become
whether you know it or not,
aware of those obligations in a variety of ways, so you can honor your moral obligations even if you have absolutely no clue what their ultimate nature is, and even if you don't believe that they come from God.
We're done. Right? The belief in God's not necessary for morality, and that's what David Wood just said. So when it comes to this whole topic, God's not needed. The moral foundation, the ontology is not needed, other than just to make you feel good when you tell your neighbor, you're wrong, my God said so.
Now, if we can honor our moral obligations without knowing where they come from, why do we need something like divine command theory? Well, we seem to understand that it's important to know where our moral obligations come from. There's a reason there are so many theories of morality being discussed at the scholarly level and at the popular level. We want a theory that explains and justifies our beliefs about right and wrong. Divine command theory accomplishes this task quite well.
It does. It does? Divine command theory explains it quite well? Huh. Go kill the Canaanites, kill everyone, men, women, and children except for the virgin girls, keep them for yourselves. Divine command theory explains that quite well. Go destroy the Amalekites. Let nothing that breathes live. Divine command theory explains that quite well. How does it explain it quite well? Because God said it. That's the explanation? He's the moral authority. He's the big cheese. He's the head honcho. And he created everything. He can see everything, see the future. He knows what's best. So if God said it, that explains it. Okay, I guess I agree with David Wood then. He explains it very well, even though it can go against our moral intuitions.
Consider the 4 features of moral obligations we discussed earlier. Moral obligations are most naturally expressed and understood as authoritative commands. Do this, don't do that. Why are they most naturally expressed and understood as authoritative commands? Because they're authoritative commands. They're commands from God. Moral obligations are objective, meaning that we can be right or wrong about them. How can they be objective? Because God has issued certain commands. If you think you have a moral obligation and it actually comes from God, then you're right about your moral obligation.
And so even if this objective morality exists, how do you know if it comes from God or not? Like even what Jesus said, love your enemies. Is that a moral obligation? I think most Christians would say yes. Can you love your enemies and shoot them at the same time? This is why Mennonites exist. How can you serve in the U.S. military and shoot your enemies when Jesus himself said, love your enemies? Well, Doug, that's different. That's like government. Jesus said that the government has the power of the sword, and he's every government that's in place is because of his doing. No, Doug, that's different. So you see what happens here, David Wood? How there's so many loopholes for these divine commands. Well, yeah, okay, you can love your enemy and shoot them. You can love your enemy and drop bombs on them. Yeah, it depends on the situation and the context, right? In my experience of the years of talking to theists, the only thing that they can say is always, always, always right, or always, always, always wrong. It's always right to obey God, and it's always, always, always wrong to disobey God. But the details, I mean, you can come up with some really bizarre ones. Like, rape is always, always, always wrong. Are you sure about that? Like if you define rape as consent, Numbers 31, verse 20, you sure about that? Abortion's always, 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 always wrong. You sure about that? Numbers 7? You sure about that? Killing apostates, always, always wrong. Stoning the practicing homosexual, always, always wrong. Gay marriage is always, always, always. Are you sure about that? I mean, don't we have to look at each situation case by case, or it doesn't depend on the interpretation? Doesn't it depend on our moral intuitions? What's written in our heart? There's some really well-meaning Christians and Muslims who, well, maybe not Muslims, but I don't know. If Apostate Prophet's here, he can tell me. But I'm sure there's some Muslims, and definitely I know there's a lot of Christians who would say gay marriage is fine. Now, those are those progressive flag-waving phony Christians, but they call themselves Christians, and they say it's okay. Did God say that or not? Is it wrong or not?
If you think you
Numbers 5. Yeah, I said number 7. You're right. Numbers 5 is the abortion scripture.
have a moral obligation and it doesn't actually come from God, you're wrong about your moral obligation. This is why we can look at people who have significantly different moral views and conclude that someone is wrong here. There are people who are very bad at math. There are people who are very bad at logic. And there are people who are very bad at morality. Moral obligations
Yeah. I wonder if he's speaking about himself there.
are overriding.
You know, what's interesting is what percentage of the general population are psychopaths? I think it's 2 or 3%. And then if you could consider nonviolent sociopaths, psychopaths, it could be as high as 5, 6, 7%. We evolved to have that percentage of psychopaths and sociopaths in our society. Most of them are nonviolent. But we have evolved that way for a reason. And because psychopaths actually have some advantages over the general population and can help societies flourish. I know some people are thinking I'm nuts right now, but David Wood knows what I'm talking about, because they can look at things and not feel anything about it and come up with more rational, objective conclusions, which puts a whole wrench, I think, in what he's saying, especially about these moral intuitions.
Meaning that they trump other kinds of obligations. Why are moral obligations overriding? Because a command from God, your creator and sustainer, takes precedence over other kinds of commands, such as commands from your government.
Why? Why does God take precedence over Joe Biden? Why? Then a Christian's going to give an answer because he's your moral creator. Well, what does that matter? So what? Well, because he made you. So what? Well, he's your sustainer. So what? Why should I? It seems like anything that has to do with morality, humans have to enforce. At least nowadays, maybe back in the Old Testament times or in the Quran times, Allah and Yahweh seem to do some of their own work. But it seems like things like morality and rights, human rights, is, if this God exists, it's all up to us. Why should this God take precedent? Why should he be an authority over humans? Why ought anyone obey him?
Moral.
Because he can hurt you if you don't. That's the answer. That's, I think, the only, or there's another answer. The other answer is just by definition. We said objective morality, you ought, moral obligations we define as just God saying things, willing things, outflowing from his nature, and you should do it because it's just the right thing to do by definition. That's basically all you can say.
Obligations are universal. We apply them to everyone with a properly functioning mind. Why are moral obligations universal? Because we're all created in the image of God, and our Creator has given all of us commands. So, divine command theory accounts for the main features of moral obligations quite easily.
Yeah, and so does evolutionary moral theory too, right? But it's not as comfortable. It makes people feel less special to think that morality has evolved over hundreds of thousands of years. I always give this example, but like Neanderthals, our ancestors, or Neanderthals are cousins, I guess, on the tree of life. But do you think copulation, coitus, had consent 300,000 years ago? I don't think we could speak 300,000 years ago. I would just not, do you want to have coitus? I mean, and then you know, that's how we communicate. I don't even know if I'm grunting.
What about atheistic moral theories? Again, moral obligations are most naturally expressed and understood as authoritative commands. But where do these authoritative commands come from if they don't come from God? There aren't a lot of options for atheists. You could be hardwired to act in certain ways, in which case your DNA is somehow issuing commands, but it's different.
Is your DNA issuing commands for you, David Wood? Were you born a psychopath? Or was it environment and culture? Were you raised to be a psychopath, or were you born that way?
Difficult to see.
Are you hardwired, David?
How a mindless molecule could be a proper authority on issues of morality.
Yeah, you see how he snuck that in? A mindless molecule. How can that be your authority? Ugh, ugh, ugh. Christians, you can see this, right? I'm not a philosopher and I hate philosophy, but you can tell that he's doing something here to like hand wave other theories away, like, oh, you believe that? It's just molecules and atoms defining morality. No, we're complex organisms that evolved over millions of years. In even the last 300,000 years, our morality has evolved. To reduce it down to molecules and morality is, what's the word? It's a cheap blow. Cheap rhetorical trick.
You could simply decide for yourself what your moral obligations are, in which case you'd be issuing commands for yourself. But if you're the one imposing moral obligations on yourself, you can obviously release yourself from those moral obligations, so that isn't helpful.
That isn't helpful? Maybe sometimes it is. How many Christians have beat themselves up thinking, I'm not good enough? The Lord Jesus said, if you love me, you will keep my commands. And I keep failing you, Lord. I keep failing. And then the guilt sets in. I'm here as your moral authority over Jesus. Did I just say that? To release you of that guilt and shame. You have the power to release yourself from that guilt and shame. You realize how many Christians commit suicide? You realize, I don't know Muslim stats, but you would think that Christians with this moral foundation and know what the ontology is for objective morality and know the epistemology of what's right and what's wrong and know the will of God in their life, basically, why would they ever commit suicide? But they do.
Society certainly commands us to behave in certain ways, but something can't be right or wrong simply because society says so, because societies are, very frequently, moral failures.
Is God a moral failure? David Wood, come on. Was it just society who said you can have slaves and you can kill other tribes, who take your land? Is a God who loves real estate more than people, it seems like, because he's willing to kill people over real estate, the promised land. Is that a moral failure on your God's part? I mean, I really do think David Wood believes God commanded those things. But he would never say that if humans were to do the exact same thing, moral failure. When God does it, not a moral failure. Now, as a philosopher, he would say, well, Doug, that's a category error.
Given atheistic moral theories, what we think of as moral obligations don't seem to come from anything remotely resembling a legitimate moral authority, which suggests that our moral obligations aren't obligations at all. Moral obligations are objective. But how can they be objective if there's no legitimate moral authority behind them? How can it be true that I have an objective moral obligation to do X if what I think of as my moral obligations are just inclinations provided by my DNA or personal choices or the latest views of my ever-changing culture?
Yeah, and well, he's throughout all this discussion, he's assuming objective morality exists, number one. And number two, why couldn't this idea of objective morality be described as common intuitions of humankind that evolved over hundreds of thousands of years, if not millions of years?
Moral obligations are overriding. But why would an inclination provided by my DNA or a personal choice or some rule of society trump all of my other obligations?
Because it helps you survive?
Moral obligations are universal. But if what I think of as my moral obligations come from my DNA or my personal choice or my society, why in the name of common sense would I think that a different person with different DNA in a different society has any of the same moral obligations I have?
Because they do. All you have to do is ask them. There's definitely things in different cultures and different tribes where we share the same moral intuitions. Now, of course, there's areas where there's different views of morality. Wouldn't that be what you would expect under naturalism? And wouldn't you expect the opposite under theism? Oh, that's right, sin ruined everything.
The peculiar features of moral obligations make no sense in an atheistic world. Instead of explaining why moral obligations are expressed as authoritative commands, why they're objective, why they're overriding, and why they're universal, atheistic theories suggest that our ordinary moral thinking is delusional.
Illusory, an illusion, not delusion. There's a difference.
AP is welcome to prove me wrong here, but good luck with that. I was plumbing the depths of morality and immorality long before the apostate prophet figured out how to put on his lederhosen in Deutschland. When I say that moral obligations
Is that true, apostate prophet? Did you put on lederhosen in Deutschland?
don't make sense in an atheistic world, this isn't David Wood, the Christian, insulting an opposing position. It's how I ended up viewing morality when I was an atheist. Let me describe my thinking back then, and AP and the rest of you can tell me where I went wrong. Here was the worldview of David the atheist. We've got this massive universe, and over here, there's this little blob we call the Milky Way. Out on one of the spiral arms of the Milky Way is a ball of hot gas we call the sun. Circling that ball of hot gas is a speck of dust we call Earth. And on the surface of this speck of dust are these little lumps of cells called humans.
Ooh. I'm hearing that David Wood didn't feel special when he was an atheist.
Who are only there because their ancestors managed to pass on genetic material better than other lumps of cells. And these human lumps of cells are now convinced that they have incredible significance and dignity, that what they do really matters, and that their deepest values. So,
Whoa. I know a lot of people, myself included, who don't think that throughout the whole cosmos that I'm that important. No. If I were to die today, do you realize that 99.99999999999% of the world won't cry? Now, maybe for you, David Wood, that bothers you, but for me, that doesn't bother me.
so precious to them are something more than mutant traits that helped their ancestors transmit DNA or the product of cultural indoctrination. They think that they have objective moral obligations, but objective moral obligations make no sense whatsoever in this world. Everything we do is the result of signals and chemical reactions in our brains. But our brains are physical. They're made of particles, and particles are governed by laws of nature, which means that all of our decisions and actions were determined long before we were born.
How is that different from your God? Now, there's many ways to go here, but I can just point to Calvinism. Calvinists believe the same thing, that before you were born, in fact, I think even non-Calvinists, Christians like yourself, David Wood, you believe that before the foundations of the universe, God knew that you'd be doing this video right now, and that you would be a Christian. In fact, some would say he decreed it, that he was sovereign over it. How is that different than the naturalist view of determinism? Are you saying it could be other than what God foreknew? Because if you can say it was something other than what God foreknew, then God knew wrong. And God's never wrong with his foreknowledge. So it had to be what God knew it to be. Oh, these philosophers are hating me now.
How can we possibly think of ourselves as morally responsible for anything we do? Notice, all I did there was apply the exact same reasoning to morality that I had already applied to religion.
How are you responsible for your salvation? You're not responsible for that. This is a spiritual battle, right? You know, the powers of darkness and the powers of light. How can you say any decision you make in your life is really your own, David Wood? With all these influences of these spiritual battles swaying you to and fro, are you really free to do anything? Don't you just think you're free and maybe you're not? This whole idea of moral responsibility, one can be a determinist and still uphold this idea of moral responsibility precisely because we're not omniscient. We don't know what effects each cause will create. And so we do, as a society, things like shaming and praising to influence, to be a cause, to affect changes in behavior. Now, whether they're determined or not, whether it could be otherwise or not, it really doesn't matter because it is too complex to figure out, at least in a lot of things, unless you're talking about Pavlov's dog. And we just do the best. And we sometimes just have to use trial and error. Say, okay, if I do X, if I shame this person, will they stop doing this? Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. If we make these certain laws, will we have a better society? Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. We don't know because we can't see the future. And this is why God had to kill the Canaanites, because he could see the future and he thought it would be better that they all be dead.
Earlier in life, I thought to myself, they tell me to believe in God. Some of them say that they can feel the presence of
Doug Dean says, I think you're confusing theology with philosophy. There's no difference between theology and the philosophy of religion, which is what David Wood's doing.
God. But I see absolutely
I'm kidding.
no evidence for the existence of God, so I'm not going to live my life as if there's a God, no matter how much they don't like my skepticism. Then eventually I thought to myself, they tell me to believe in their moral values. Some of them say that they feel this or that is right or wrong, but I see absolutely no evidence for their moral values. So I'm not going to live my life as if their moral values are valid, no matter how much they don't like my moral skepticism.
See, as an atheist, I can see value in a lot of things Christians believe. What they say comes from their God. Some things I disagree with, some things I agree with. Doesn't matter if this objective morality exists. What it all boils down to is humans basically trying to convince each other which is the best course of action. It seems like God's irrelevant in that process. Even Christians among themselves will spend hours and hours trying to convince each other this is what God really wants us to do. And people like David Wood knows that's true.
Some atheists are similarly consistent. They apply the same skepticism to moral claims that they apply to religious claims. You can read some Nietzsche or some J.L. Mackie for examples. Far more atheists, however, are extremely inconsistent here. They apply one level of skepticism to belief in God, and they reject the existence of God. But they don't want to reject belief in objective moral values, so they radically lower their level of skepticism so that they can go.
Oh, that reminds me, because what he just said, it makes it sound like the vast majority of atheists don't believe in objective moral values, or naturalists don't. I don't even know if that's true. I get the sense he thinks that a lot of naturalists or people in general believe in objective moral values, and I'm not even sure that's true. So let's go to that poll. What are we at? So far in the poll of my viewers, which are mostly atheists, I think, but there's a lot of Christians here too. Do objective morals exist? Does objective morality exist? 59% say no. So everything David Wood's saying right now doesn't apply to 59% of my viewers right now, because they're not being inconsistent. They're saying objective morality does not exist. And 21% yes. And so let's assume that there's some Christians in here, but there could be a lot of atheists who believe in objective morality as well, and just say that evolution is the foundation for that. I think I voted I don't know. So that's interesting. 59%. How many people? How do I figure that out? How many people voted? Show count. There we go. Oh, wow. Got over 100 votes. That's pretty good. Excellent. Thanks for voting.
Go on believing in their moral claims. Inconsistency at its finest. God and objective moral obligations stand together or fall together. Nietzsche realized that. He tried to live consistently by rejecting both God and moral obligation. Then he went insane, although syphilis may have had something to do with that.
Let this be a warning to you, naturalist atheists. Let this be a warning to you, fence-sitting Christians who are thinking about leaving Christianity or Islam. If you leave and you live a consistent life when it comes to morality, you might, like Nietzsche, go insane. I'm not saying you definitely will go insane, but it did happen to some. I mean, I just thought it would be a fair warning to let you soon-to-be atheists or naturalists know this. You might go crazy if you reject God as your moral foundation. This is sick. This is...
I tried to live consistently by rejecting both God and moral obligation. I also started going insane. But a little before I was carted off to my third mental hospital, I re-examined the evidence, and I chose the other consistent path, God and moral obligation.
Well, wait a minute. What's the evidence for God and moral obligation? That convinced you? I'm trying to think back of his testimony. Because his testimony is his trailer, right? And I did a video on it once, and I remember a quote he said that he knew almost nothing about Jesus. And then he started, but he believed. It was almost like he had this desperation to change his life, to be made anew, to be made refreshed. I'm going from memory here, but his situation in life was so desperate, so bad, that he took this, dare I say, philosophy of life, i.e. Christianity, to heart, took it seriously, and it helped change his life. If this is true, David Wood, my worldview explains this. This is why we have religion, to help people like you, so you don't kill people. You need the guy, the Father, who's up in heaven, up, because heaven's up, above sea level. You need this God as your moral authority to tell you right from wrong, to give you this obligation, to scare you a little bit for you to do the right thing. But please know, David Wood, there's people out there who don't need that. Now, maybe they need to be scared by the threat of going to jail or fines and penalties. But some people can do the right thing just by feeling good about themselves. Helping the old lady across the street makes you feel good. So you do things like that.
And the world suddenly made sense. Now, before you atheists misunderstand me here, I'm not saying that you're going to go insane. That's reserved for...
I'm not saying you're going insane, but I'm just saying that there's this guy named Nietzsche who went insane when he lived a consistent life. So I think David Wood's advice is, if you're a naturalist listening, please be inconsistent, because I don't want you to risk going crazy.
For a particular kind of people with a maniacal obsession for going wherever their positions lead them. I'm saying that in order to avoid believing in God and to avoid going insane, you're going to be inconsistent.
He said it. I got to replay that. That's funny.
Their positions lead them. I'm saying that in order to avoid believing in God and to avoid going insane, you're going to be inconsistent.
Yeah, that's exactly what I just said. David Wood is saying that if you are going to be consistent and don't believe in God, you're probably going to go nutso. And you don't want to go crazy. You don't want to go to a mental hospital. So therefore, either be inconsistent in your beliefs or believe in God. Any God will do, but preferably the Christian God, because David Wood's a Christian. No, he wouldn't say any God would do. Believing in a false God might help a little bit, but what's the difference between believing in moral obligations from a false God and no God? Really, what's the difference? It's all about the beliefs then, right? It's more what the molecules in your brain are doing.
And inconsistency is not going to win this debate. Prove me wrong, AP.
Yeah. So there's nothing new here. Heard this 1,000 times. That might be an exaggeration. Some of the delivery was new. Like if you are a Christian and you have a non-Christian or an atheist friend who you think will never, ever become a Christian, really, you should just tell them, please stay inconsistent in your worldview. So I don't want to see you go crazy, because that's what happened to Nietzsche. And who wants to go nuts, right? Do I want to take callers? How long did that take? An hour 10. How do you vote? You press the link, the pin link on top. Let me see where it's at now. Refresh. 53% no, don't believe in objective morality. 30% yes. 70% don't know. So none of this inconsistency thing applies to over half of the viewers listening right now on my show because it's irrelevant, because they don't believe objective morality exists in the first place. But David Wood would say, well, you guys are lying. Or no, you're deluded. That's what he would say. Not lying. You're in a delusion because you do believe in objective morality. You're just deluding yourself. Because I tell you, when someone does something wrong to you, well, then you're going to say, this is wrong. It's always, always wrong. He's only been to 2 mental hospitals. I think he said he was on his way to this 3rd one, and then he found Christianity, and that cured his mental illness. Or didn't cure it, but helped him. Yeah. Yeah, I'll take callers. I doubt if any Christians will come in, but if there's a Christian here who disagreed with anything I said, I will hear you out. Do I have the link? Yeah. But you can't see it, can you? There we go. But I can't pin it because I want to keep the poll pinned. I've heard some Christians say that murder wasn't objectively wrong until God said it was in the 10 Commandments. I think, who said that? Was it Ray Comfort? Yeah, but he's not the sharpest knife in the drawer. No, Trevor Lund. Thanks for posting the link, Aaron. Yeah, if all humans died, objective morality would still exist, according to David Wood. It just would be useless, unless the chimpanzees picked it up. Thanks, Matt Metro. I'm doing well, Husky. Yeah, you just missed the Shannon Q, but it was great. Ouch, Gabriel Platz. Do I think David will attempt murder again? No. Even if he were to leave Christianity, I don't think he would. He's, what, must be 40 years old? 45? I don't know. He's matured since then. He has the threat of jail, which is better than hell. I'm waiting for Christians and Jesus. Waiting for Christians and Jesus to come on my show. Thank you for the donation. How probable is that? Oh, I missed another donation, didn't I? My apologies to that person, but thank you. Doug God has an open house this weekend, and bids must be in by 6 p.m. Tuesday. Next Tuesday? It's Wednesday today. Yeah, well, God is in the real estate business. Everybody knows this. If you're a Christian, you should only invest in real estate and do what God does. No cryptocurrency, no stocks, real estate, land, farmland, really. Will you ever tell us the story behind that one ripped t-shirt you have? No, what happens in Tampa stays in Tampa. I grew out of murder a long time ago, says JG. Good for you. When I became an atheist, I killed and raped all the people I wanted to, which was 0. I'm curious to see if this video will be monetized. We are to love our enemy, but we can defend ourselves against them, and if it escalates, we can kill them if a threat to ourselves and our family. That's my view. Rory Husky, how dare you? If you kill an intruder into your home, and if they're not a Christian, do you realize you send them automatically, immediately to hell? Whereas if they kill you, you go automatically to heaven. You need to rethink things. Yeah, I understand, Doug Dean. But my guess is he wouldn't. Hello, can you hear me? Someone came in. I can't hear you. And he left. I tell you, you knock on the door of my heart, I will open it. For all you Christians out there who are weary and downtrodden, I will give you rest. Jesus said we should buy swords? Yeah, he did say that. But Rory Husky, my logic is rock solid. You kill someone, you don't know their soul. Okay, Ray, who? Let's try again. Hey, I can hear you.
Oh, sorry, just fixed my camera. Good to see you again, PineCreek.
Oh, that's you. I remember you.
Yeah.
I got the wrong thing on here. How are you doing?
Oh, good, thank you. Really enjoying you talking about David Wood and morality. That's something I've been thinking about recently. I watched the video.
Why you been thinking about it recently? You're not.
Yeah.
You're not thinking of killing someone, are you?
No, mainly just like Kantian's universal maximum, for example. You know that you should
Move your head to the right a bit. Yeah. That's it. Because Jesus was shining behind you, and I couldn't see you.
Oh yeah. Sorry, the transfiguration's taking place.
Yeah, right behind your head. If I remember correctly, you're a Christian Calvinist, correct?
Yes, but let me make a public statement in saying that I've actually changed my faith. I'm still Christian, but I have converted to the Coptic Orthodox faith.
Coptic Orthodox, which means
Yes.
what in one sentence? How are you different?
So I belong to one of the original apostolic churches that was founded in AD 42 in Cairo, Egypt by St. Mark.
But is the benefits better? Is there food better at the potlucks, or why did you switch?
Well, I think ultimately, when I last spoke with you, just to give you a bit of background, I studied a lot of church history, so I already knew that the early church was not Calvinist. The early church was clearly much more aligned with orthodoxy. I think with Protestantism, to be a Protestant, you have to kind of explain that away somehow. But I had to admit that I was barking up the wrong tree. And where was the faith for 1500 years, right before the Reformation? So I just had to be honest and say, okay, this is one of the apostolic churches. I believe this is the most faithful, so this is where I'm going. And I stuck with my conviction. But to answer your other question about what do they have, the sacraments, I think that's the main thing. The means of grace, the Eucharist, Christ's flesh and blood for the life of the world, for example.
But David Wood's version of Christianity has that too.
Which one?
Sacraments, like communion.
Not all of them do. Like, for example, in the Reformed faith, they don't believe that the bread and the wine turns into the body and blood of Jesus, so they don't have that.
So you believe in the literal, that a miracle happens each time.
Yeah.
A miracle that you can't verify, though. It's just, you just believe it.
Well, there are documented Eucharistic miracles in the Catholic Church. There's one in particular which I think is pretty compelling. Just one. I haven't studied too many others, but there's one where there's a documentary by Reasons to Believe, and I think it's pretty compelling. And I can tell you, I prayed specifically that when I had the Eucharist for the first time, it would taste like Jesus, like blood. And when I took the bread, it did, or the body, sorry, it did.
You bit into a cracker and it tasted like blood to you?
Yeah, it wasn't a cracker though. It was they have blessed bread, and they pick out a certain blessed bread in the Coptic Church, and they consecrate it and sanctify it.
Well, I'll tell you, my confidence in your religion and Christianity would go sky high if I went and got a Ritz cracker right now, or a piece of bread. You prayed, and if I bite into it, if my whole mouth gets red with blood and it tastes like blood. Like, do you think if I was right next to you when this happened to you, do you think I would have tasted blood?
If you were like me, if you had joined the church, because again, communion's only given to the ones who are part of the church. But if you had joined the church and you prayed that, I believe God would have answered you. I've heard stories about that. In fact, a friend of mine who converted to the Eastern Orthodox faith experienced the same thing.
But it wouldn't work here on live stream.
No, because again, it's closed communion, so you can't give it out to anyone outside the church.
Does it have to be a certain guy in a certain robe praying first, or can it be anyone?
In special cases, they can be done without a priest, but normatively it has to be done by a priest.
Isn't that weird to you that someone special has to do it? Like, don't you believe that if there's a God out there, we're all one, neither male nor female, neither a person in a purple robe or a pink robe has special powers?
That's true. But God has also established a hierarchy, and he's established certain people to be ministers to his congregation. So, the priest is meant to be an intercessor for us. He's meant to stand before God for us. And that's why we even have confession. And I've confessed for the first time, actually. And to be honest, that was actually quite a really healthy and very helpful experience, to be honest.
Okay, well, let's get back to the topic at hand. Let's do the speed round here. Do you believe that objective morality exists?
Absolutely.
Okay. And do you believe God is the source, the Christian God is the source of that objective morality, the foundation?
Yes, I do. And specifically his nature and the commandments that he gives is a reflection of that nature. So I'm not going with the, just to be clear, so we don't bring up the youth road dilemma.
Okay. And why ought, so very short answer, why ought I obey God?
By definition, any obligations that are placed upon you is an obligation. So, by very definition, you're obliged to do it.
So if someone says my definition is of moral obligations to do what the state says, what the country leaders say, and you ask, well, why would you follow your state? And you say, well, and I say, by definition, I give the same answer you gave. What would you say? Of
course, the difference is that you're talking about subjective morality versus I'm talking about objective absolute morality. So it's grounded in reality. It's not grounded in a preference.
Well, isn't God a person?
Yes, he is.
Isn't then?
But remember, his being or his essence is not a person, and his essence is unknown to us. Theologically, we can't know what God's essence is.
But I'm just saying, if he's a person or three persons, then he's a subject or subjects, and so he's still subjective. Objective morality comes from a subjective person, namely God or Jesus. Or
It comes from his essence and his energies or his actions. It's not
his
from
nature.
his nature. Yeah.
Okay. And what do you think is the best way to know what his will is when it comes to morals?
Definitely to study scripture, to seek God's counsel, seek his wisdom, talk to people. There's a lot of wisdom in multiple counselors, because not every moral issue is clear cut.
So if it's not clear cut, what do you do then?
Not every moral issue. Like, for example, it's very clear you shouldn't murder. That's pretty clear. But there are other cases of morality.
Is it
For
clear
example,
though?
people bring up, yeah, like explicitly, thou shalt not murder, right?
Right, but how do you know the difference between murder or self-defense or military killing or like it's? I give this thought experiment often. If I tell you that I saw a person walk down the street, pull out a knife, and a woman standing there takes the knife and stabs the woman in the heart and kills her.
Yep.
And then I ask you, is that murder? What would you say?
Because it was against the law of the state and it was against the law of God. Yes.
Okay,
it was murder.
Okay, what if I told you that woman was really an AI, a robot? Is it murder now?
Yeah.
It is? You can murder a robot?
Oh, sorry. Forgive me. I thought you were talking about the person who stabbed the person. No. Sorry. I get what you're saying.
Well, either way, is the person who stabbed a murderer if it's a robot?
Again, it depends on what the law says, right? Because, again, murder is defined as unlawful killing. So whatever the law of the state says and whatever God says.
So if murder is the unlawful killing and if humans make the law in the state, then really God has nothing to do with it.
Again, because the Bible says we have to submit to governing authorities, right? You're probably familiar with Romans 13. So this part of the objective morality is submitting to the government. However, the Bible also is very clear. If they contradict what God says, then you are to obey God rather than men, as St. Peter said on Acts 5, I think.
So if a Nazi says, I'm killing Jews because that's the law, state says so.
Yep.
You would say it's wrong.
Again,
you would say it's wrong because it violates God's law.
Yes, that's right. And that's why the Germans were held accountable, because they were not, because they were subject to a law that was higher than themselves and they didn't submit to it.
But what if we cross out the word Jew and put the word Canaanite in? Then it would become good. And if we move it 2,000 years back?
Well, to be honest, bringing up that issue, I'm still thinking about that because I've been looking to different interpretations. I remember seeing your stream where you talked with
Randall Rouser.
Randall Rouser, yeah, he was talking about the allegorical view and things like that. So honestly, I'm still thinking that through because being in the Coptic Church too, we also have fathers who interpreted Scripture allegorically in many cases. So I'm just contemplating that before I talk very deeply on the Canaanite issue.
But to me, it seems very capricious. It's up to God. If the Jews were the Canaanites in 2,000 years earlier, roughly, then I think you would be forced to say, no, that wasn't wrong.
Right. So let's just say hypothetically we go with the literal interpretation that this actually has happened historically and that they wiped out the Canaanites. They were told to go wipe them out. As you already know, I think the context was that 400 years they've been sacrificing their babies to Molech. They're doing all these horrible things. God gave them time to repent, and in the end, He sent out His people to go and deal with that.
But what if? I understand what you're saying, that God foresaw that these were horrible, wicked people. But what if in God's foreknowledge, He knew that 24 million Jews would take over the world and do terrible things and kill many babies and just the worst possible things possible. And so in his foreknowledge, God predestined, or he decreed that the Nazis would work on his behalf to wipe them out. And so then you would say it is okay?
We'd have to verify this. That's the problem, because again, if God wanted them to do that, there would have to be clear revelation. They have to be established, and again, I believe the canon's closed. So, yeah.
But you do believe like the Canaanite stuff is clear revelation?
Oh yeah, sure, yeah, that's part of the canon. Yeah.
Yeah, I think the Old Testament atrocities is. I think you have to become a Randall Rouser Christian or just get out.
On a personal note, I actually agree with you on that.
Oh, really?
Yeah. I mean, I come from a fundamentalist background, and I definitely do not resonate with it the way I used to.
But Jesus said a lot of bad stuff too.
Yeah, what are you thinking?
Well, the parable in Luke about hell, and be fearful of not the one who can destroy the body, but be fearful of the one who can destroy the soul. That he'll burn up the chaff and separate the goats from the sheep and create vessels of destruction. Or did Paul say that? But yeah, it doesn't matter whether Paul said it or Jesus said it. I think you would say that they're both valuable. There's a lot of tribalism, a lot of threats in what Jesus said. Disagree?
I would go with the term warning. He's warning basically this is what will happen if you continue on the path that you're doing. That's why he said, narrow is the way to life and wide is the gate that leads to destruction.
Because you still believe in the literal hell, right?
Well, actually, I've taken for a long time now. I've taken the orthodox view of that. Actually, even before I joined, which was that hell will be the presence of God for the non-believer. Basically, God's fire will be the presence of hell for many people, and then for those who love God, it'll be heaven.
Okay, but it's still a really bad
place. It's a spiritual fire. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thanks for coming on. I'm just curious if someone else wants to come on before I head out. So, but always fun to talk to you.
Yeah, no worries, man. Hey, God bless.
Okay.
And science bless you.
Exactly. I was about to say that. Okay, the room's open if someone else wants to come in. Man, tasted blood in bread. Would David Wood call that a delusion? Can you force your mind, or can your mind take one taste and convert it into another? No, I'm not using StreamYard. I'm using Whereby. Did someone say hockey? Here's an interesting question for Christians. For the Christians who believe in a literal hell, if the whole world were to die today, what percentage of people will go to hell? If you're a Christian, type in your answer. It's a guess. I'm not going to hold you to it. The whole world dies today. What percentage of the world goes to hell? Christians or Muslims can answer. Great G-Man says 70%. %, 75%. Oh, Boas Biggie doesn't believe in the traditional view of hell. Well, you don't have to believe in the traditional view of hell. Just, I'm asking who doesn't go to heaven? What percentage? 99.9, 20%. Oh, it's all over the map. It has to be over 50%, yes? Otherwise, the whole wide is the road to destruction, narrows the gate to life, doesn't make sense. It has to be over 50%. You can never leave Christianity. Face facts. That's spoken like a true Calvinist. Well, it doesn't even have to be a Calvinist. There's scripture that puts pressure on that you can be a true believer and fall away. Why is the book of James written if one cannot be a true Christian and fall away? Why is the verse saying that what's the phrase? You sacrifice Christ again. It's impossible for someone who has tasted the fruit and left and come back. Is that in Romans? I understand, Rory. I'm giving you the Mennonite perspective. Actually, there's quite a few Christians who believe that. You're better. As a Christian, why do you want to stay on earth so badly? If someone broke into your house and wanted to kill you and your family, you all die at the same time. You all go to heaven at the same time if you're all Christian. Why do you fear dying? I mean, go to heaven. There's a buffet awaiting you, right? Unless you really don't believe it. The Coptic Church uses 74 books of the Bible. Oh, really? They add an extra 8, the Apocrypha. What's the final poll results? Oh, it's dropped below 50%. 47% of my viewers do not believe in objective morality, that it exists. My apologies to David Wood. He was scheduled to come on and defend his views, but we ran out of time.